Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our Dare to Teach series. I'm so happy that you're joining us here at LearnStrong.net. Well, we are now about to talk about screw-ups. So let's take our second core value. We're going to define the integral teacher as not just a person who is committed to honesty, but to somebody who has to accept the fact that forgiveness is going to be a huge part of what it means to be a teacher. And I told you, I've got 12 of these core values that I've kind of thought, man, this seems to me to help to define an integral teacher. And the first of those, the first four of those we take as a unit. The first of those we've already talked about in honesty. Now we're going to talk about forgiveness. Then we can talk about freedom and love, compassion. Now, the assumption for us here is that you have been working with our stuff at LearnStrong.net. Down that left-hand side, the playlist, again, called Dare to Teach. And you've already worked through our two introductory set of lectures. I put those in the comments section, as well as our previous lecture on honesty. I think it makes sense, although obviously you can jump into any one of these lectures unto itself, but I think it makes sense to try and hear the things that we've said before, because simply we're going to be building. For example, do you remember in an earlier lecture I pointed out, and I love this debate, I do, because I've been doing this thing teaching for a while, and I love this when people start talking about emolument, salary, and the way in which either we are properly paid or we're not. And I remember having this interesting conversation with a pal of mine who just so happens to be a surgeon. And I said, well, here's the thing. There's a big difference, as we said in an earlier lecture. There's a big difference between teaching and being a brain surgeon. And I will make the argument that teaching is way harder than being a brain surgeon. Of course, my pal was like, I'm sorry. First of all, I did a whole lot more schooling than you'll ever do. And I said, I can't deny that. But think about this. When you take a risk as a brain surgeon, most of the time, that's called death, right? Which is why what you do is pretty scripted. When I take a risk, we call that learning, right? We call that learning. And to that degree, teachers, I will often argue, are professional screw-ups, right? If you're a teacher, let me say it this way. If you're a teacher who always needs to be right, you're a perfectionist of a kind, then you need to stay out of the classroom, because you're going to be challenged. I mean, there's just no other way to say it. Now, I will say this is one of the major changes that I've witnessed over the last 3+ decades of teaching. I think in the old days, you could be a perfectionist and get away with it a little bit better than you can today. Why? I've already said it. Students are far more sophisticated. And if they are constantly able to push your buttons because you are a perfectionist, you loathe chaos, you definitely want to make sure that everything is always happening the correct way. You're going to be challenged as a teacher, right? You got to understand this, I believe, this concept, to understand forgiveness as I'm going to define forgiveness. And I will say, of many of the concepts that I'm sharing right now, this is one of those I was never actually told in Teachers College. I was never told, hey, you know what, we're going to take risks and we're going to fail in the classroom all the time. Every class period, every day, every week, every year, dare I say it, even all career long. And if you can't get right with that, if you can't be comfortable with the fact that you're going to be swimming in the middle of chaos all the time, you'll go back to the very opening lecture where we read from Song of Myself, passage 46, 47. He says it, laughingly, dash in the midst of the sea, in the scary part of the sea, that's where you're going to be, are going to be swimming. Now, it is true. Myself, along with any other teacher I've ever known, will always voice this concern, right? That is to say, I'm afraid of mistakes, right? I will often take the safe approach. Think about that. And I will ask this question, well, what about the student who can't learn using the safe approach? Is that student lost, to remain frustrated for the rest of his or her life, their life? Right? Now, often I've heard teachers who will say this, and then they get out. I'm not an effective teacher. To me, this is sad. The reason they say they're not an effective teacher is because they have so many screw-ups. Right? Now, I love the Stoics. I'm a huge fan of the work that Ryan Holiday does. I recommend all of his books and his podcasts for every teacher. I think listening to what Holiday has to say about Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus and the rest of them makes a lot of sense. Aurelius said it this way in his notes to himself, in his meditations, and I think every teacher has to remember this. I think we have to not only remember, I think we should probably recite it to ourselves. He said it this way, soon you will have forgotten all things, and all things will have forgotten you. Now, what's powerful about this, I think? Because no matter how long we do this teaching gig, we can't ever take ourselves too seriously, our work that seriously. It's dangerous. Why? Two reasons. First of all, we're not going to be able to let go of all the mistakes that we will make. And trust me, we will make mistakes. Okay? And then secondly, we're going to be so easily hurt by the pain that others cause us. And trust me, that's coming, okay? That we're going to be frustrated all the time. I want you, though, to consider the beautiful perspective of 1,000 years. Can we say this? This is my one of my readings of the Stoic thinkers. Think about the beautiful perspective of 1,000 years. 1,000 years from now, is anyone going to remember my screw-ups in room 303? I mean, really. No matter how monumental they seem at the moment, 1,000 years from now, how much of this is ever going to be recalled or remembered? I think this can trouble teachers because they'll often ask, well, if that's the case, then what's the point of it all? But I want to argue there's tremendous freedom, and that's why we're going to get to freedom in our next talk. There's tremendous freedom in a perspective that says, look, I can't take what I do that seriously. I'm a risk taker. I'm always challenging myself to do this thing a little bit better, and because that's the case, I'm going to have lots and lots of mistakes in my career. Now, I think that this kind of a perspective can lead to a certain kind of practicing of forgiveness that is a letting go, no question, right? We can let go of our mistakes, because we're going to make them. We can let go of our students' mistakes, their nasty actions, the way that they often will treat us unfairly, or other students in the classroom unfairly. We can let go of the mistakes of anyone outside of our classroom, and those are obviously going to happen as well. We have to find a way to not be somehow burdened by that. I mean, that classic word picture of trying to walk up the mountain with the backpack, and every time you meet a rock, you put it in your backpack. This, I think, is the word picture for a lot of teachers, right? And think of it this way. For those of you who are teachers who haven't gotten yet to year 10, just wait. By the time you get to year 10 and you look back over your shoulder, you're going to see so many mistakes. In fact, if you are writing in your teacher's training journals, I would recommend that you sit down and write about your 3 greatest mistakes from the first 10 years or beyond of your teaching career. You will find yourself easily laughing at some of the mistakes because you overreacted, maybe. You were so upset. And now that you look at it, you realize we are evolving spiritual beings. And therefore, by definition, as teachers, we have to make mistakes. We have to take risks. We have to say out loud, man, I'm not really sure. I'm gonna give this a try. Let's see what happens. But think of it this way. You couldn't have known certain truths, back to our discussion of honesty, before the mistakes were made. Do you know what I mean? Young teachers often say, why didn't they teach me this in teachers' college? Why didn't they teach me this? And I will always say, hey, the most important stuff you'll ever learn about teaching couldn't have been taught in school. You'll remember this is what Whitman, or he will say, Whitman the poet will say in Song of the Open Road, you can't teach wisdom in schools, right? It can't be done that way. To that degree now, we're going to talk a little bit about humor. We're going to come back to this idea later. I think it's one of the most important elements of good teaching is you got to have a sense of humor, right? As you point out to your students your own failures. It gives them, think about this, the freedom to take risks too. Now I can hear some of you already ready to ask out loud, yeah, but aren't you afraid that if students see you as a mistake maker, they might stop believing in you and trusting in you? Coaches will often ask me this as I work with coaches. Yeah, but if you just come into the locker room and say, well, okay, fellas, we tried that. Obviously it didn't work. I have to try something else. What leads them to think that all of a sudden the next thing you're going to try will have any greater merit and any more benefit? That don't they begin to kind of have a skeptic view of you? And I would say it this way. Well, the key is not that you made the mistake. We're all going to do that. The key is how you keep going. Now we're back to Dante, aren't we, right? From our earlier comments in Inferno 24, the up on your feet passage. All of us as teachers will meet a moment when we are done. We're finished. We're ready to be done. And we sit down. But we need to hear that Virgil voice in our head that says, no. There's a higher ladder yet to climb, right? There's more work to be done. And It's the question of what we do with the mistake after the mistake that students are going to be paying attention to, looking at, trying to analyze. It's not that I admit I made a mistake with my students. It's that I say, now I'm ready to find a better solution to our problem. Can we do that? Think about it this way. The best administrators I know, let's talk leadership for a moment. One of the classic positive elements of great leadership is that ability to stand in front of a staff and to say, hey, you know what? I want you to take risks. I take risks, I want you to take risks. And because we're taking risks, guess what? We're going to fail. I'm not concerned about your failing. I'm concerned about what you do after you fail. So try something with students. If it doesn't work, we'll sit down in PLC, we'll talk about why it didn't work. But we're going to be honest about one thing. We're constantly evolving as instructors to take the safe approach. To say, I'm going to try and work in a classroom and have no mistakes. I mean, I'm always troubled when I hear a teacher say something like, man, it was a great day. There weren't any challenges today at all. To me, that is not a great day. That's called boredom. Because if you have enough of those strung together, guess what? All of a sudden, you're starting to look towards the end of your career, waiting for your paycheck. That is not teaching. Students will recognize that as not teaching. Why? Because you're not invested. When you're invested, you're going to try whatever it takes. And when you try whatever it takes, you're going to screw it up. You're going to make mistakes. Again, it isn't the question of making the mistake. It's how do I respond from it? How do I come back with it? What kind of attitude can I have? So, for example, can I forgive my mistakes? Now we're back to our big five. See, notice how we'll play this game. Can I forgive myself as it relates to the mistakes that are inevitably going to be made epistemologically? Well, the fallibilist position, I think I'm right, but I could be wrong, is the one we're always seeking to have as teachers. We know that the truth is, man, I often will fall into my absolutist position. I'm right, you're wrong, sit down, I'm the teacher, I have the power. But was that really the best way to handle that situation? See, I gotta be willing to forgive myself. I gotta help my students to be able to do that. Right? I gotta help those outside of my classroom begin to do that as well. I mean, think about the power of a parent-teacher conversation when a parent will begin to talk about a challenged youth that they are trying to raise. And how can you help them to get to an epistemological fallibilist position? Can I forgive myself for the times ontologically that I forgot all three of those prime elements of myself? My body, my mind, my spirit. And as well, can I help my students get to that? Can I help them understand what's going on with themselves as it relates to what they are as an ontological being? That is to say, you're a body, you got to take care of it. You're a mind, you got to help it. And you're not just that, you're also a spirit. And how can you deal with that? Can I forgive the mistakes that I've made psychologically? How fear often will motivate me to limit myself, to keep me from trying new things because I'm so afraid, right? Or how about the sociological mistakes that I've made? I often let others control what I'm doing. My concern, my fears about how, for example, they might respond will keep me from trying new things. And then finally, can I forgive the mistakes that I've made in terms of theodicy? Why is it that so regularly when bad things happen in my classroom, my first thought is, no, why does this have to happen to me? As opposed to trying to learn. And it's a lifetime of learning, isn't it? That's why we read our Dante, isn't it? That's why we read our Milton. It's a lifetime trying to learn how to see again with a more healthy, a more mindful perspective. Okay, I'm not happy this happened, but can I learn something from it? Can I learn something through it? Can I learn from my mistakes? Athletes will always say that the greatest athletes are the ones who can learn through their mistakes, because of their mistakes. And it's what makes them stronger, as the Nietzsche quote says. Whatever doesn't destroy me makes me stronger. Can I play that game? Can I help my students? Can I help those outside of my classroom learn forgiveness of themselves and of others? Let me give you a classic example of this. We have a saying in Room 303 that the only problem with gambling is that it's gambling. Now, we speak about this as it refers specifically to cheating. Of course, students, and we'll talk about this in more detail later, students have a very interesting view of cheating. So, for example, they often will not see gaining extra information on an exam as cheating. But if a student turns that student in, that is cheating. That's a violation of certain kinds of principles. It's an interesting world that we teach in now. But I would ask you as teachers, how do you handle a student who has been caught cheating? My first comment is always the only problem with gambling is it's gambling. And you gambled, now you got caught. But the real challenge is, what are we going to do next? Am I going to hold this against the student for the rest of the semester, the year, even the career of the student in high school and beyond? When I look at that student, the very first thing am I going to think about, oh, you're the kid who cheated and I caught you. I busted you. Or am I able, in a spirit of love, compassion, we're going to get there, to be able to help the student recognize, we all make mistakes and we got to move on. What'd you learn from the experience? Is it possible to actually forgive ourselves? Because often teachers will say if a student is caught cheating, well, it's my fault. I set up a situation where the student had to cheat, it's my fault. And we take this very seriously, as we should, but we can't take it that seriously. That's my point. And all learning involves falling. Back to Mikey and his bike. We're going to fall. Students are going to fall. Those outside of our classroom are going to make mistakes. We have to be willing to live through those mistakes. So, to finish this brief talk, I dare you, Alon's, back to our Whitman reference, I dare you to begin to find ways to practice forgiveness, right? Because here's the deal. If we can't have the honesty to forgive, we're never going to know freedom. And freedom is the reason that we actually work with students in a classroom. It is for freedom that we will spend our lives doing this chaotic thing called teaching. Just to finish, in your teaching learning journals, I would challenge you, what's a time when you practiced forgiveness and it comes to mind and you were able to do it? You kind of go, high five, man, that was so cool. I caught the student cheating, I helped the student, and that student became one of my top students, and I wrote an amazing letter of recommendation for that student after the fact, and I mentioned the fact that the student was caught cheating, and then worked their way through the semester, through the year, and I'm so proud of that student, the time I was positive. Can I remember a time, this is always the tough one, isn't it, in our learning journals. Can I remember a time when I didn't forgive? Maybe I didn't forgive myself, maybe I didn't forgive a student or students, maybe I didn't forgive somebody outside the classroom, and I still hold resentment for that. I'm still dragging that bag of rocks around on my back, and I gotta let it go, because it's the only way that I'm ever gonna know what we'll talk about next. Freedom. Thank you.